Most animators are familiar with the 12 principles of animation as described in the 1981 Disney book, The Illusion of Life. In the process of creating my animation tutorials for Lynda or LinkedIn Learning, I found that many principles fall outside of these 12 categories, so I've had to create my own list to structure my own courses. I've made this list purely for myself, but because it's been useful for me, I hope that some of you will find it helpful as well. Appeal, strong design, staging, acting and pantomime, keys and breakdowns, straight ahead and pose to pose, thumbnails, timing, spacing and easing, squash and stretch, arcs, primary and secondary action, silhouette, line of action and reversal, anticipation, overshoot and settle, opposing action, counterpose, leading action, breaking joints, overlap and follow through, accents and exaggeration. Let's take a look at each one of these more closely. Appeal doesn't merely mean cute. Of course, characters with large eyes or button eyes do tend to be appealing. Villains and ugly characters also have appeal, so you should think of this principle as charisma or charm or visual interest. Strong design is crucial. We construct characters from basic forms like spheres, cylinders and boxes. We use model sheets to dictate the correct designs and to keep the drawings consistent. And always remember, you're not drawing lines, you're drawing volumes. Staging is important because an incorrect position of characters or cameras can result in a banal shot that's boring to animate and boring to watch. In the left panel, it's not really obvious what's happening in the scene, but in the right panel you can see clearly the small character is having a really hard time convincing his friends. In this example, the power dynamic between the employee and the boss is much clearer in the second panel. So correct staging communicates character and story elements, and it's also visually interesting. A classic acting and pantomime test is to draw a sack of flour in various emotions and actions, and it should be possible to read the pose without seeing a face or body parts like arms or legs. Animation acting is more in common with the physical comedy of the silent era. Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd and Chaplin would be good examples. Keys are the main poses in a scene, and they establish the most important actions and emotions. After that, the breakdowns loosen up the motion between the keys, and they create visual interest and vitality. Straight ahead and pose to pose are two different ways of animating a scene, and in the straight ahead method, the first key is drawn, then the second, then the third, and so on. This scene was drawn straight ahead from left to right, and I had no idea where I was going other than I wanted the character to be very upset. In pose to pose animation, the first key is drawn and then the last. The intermediate keys are then blocked in, followed by the breakdowns. Straight ahead produces looser animation, but you can easily lose control of the volumes or the actions. Pose to pose allows much greater control and planning, but sometimes can be a little bit stiffer than straight ahead animation. Thumbnails can be stick figures or polished drawings as you need. Even complex actions can be planned as thumbnails, and this will allow you to see the entire action in your scene in a single image. Timing, spacing and easing. Timing is the frame number that the animator assigns to the keys or the extremes, slowing or speeding the action. This determines how fast or how slow the basic action is. Spacing refers to the position of the breakdown and in-between frames between the extremes. This is usually controlled by a timing chart, and in-between frames must ease in and out between these extremes, or else the action will appear floaty. You can also increase the spacing by moving the keys further apart. Squash and stretch determines how cartoony or naturalistic the character animation is. The more squash and stretch, the cartoonier. The amount of squash and stretch can depend on the anatomy, so for example, the head will squash and stretch much less than the jaws or the jowls of the face or a fat belly. Volumes must be consistent on these squash and stretch drawings or the character will appear to grow or shrink. Most objects move in arcs or on curved paths. It's crucial to plot these arcs because arc errors are really easy to make and they catch the eye. Primary action is usually the body or the character, whatever is alive in the scene. Clothing or hair is the secondary action and responds to the primary. In this case, the ball is the primary action and the cloth tied to it is the secondary action. So the primary doesn't always have to be a living thing, sometimes it can be an object. The wizard's beard, hat, sleeves and belt are all secondary actions. A silhouette by itself should be able to communicate the character's emotions and actions. We shouldn't need to see any interior details such as the face, for example. That's the ideal. A line of action is an imaginary line that runs from the base of the character to the head or along the strongest direction of physical action. You should design strong poses around a simple line of action. Usually it's a C curve or an S curve. And if a pose is built upon this basic form, it's much easier to design a stronger silhouette. When you apply this principle to animation, you'll find the power of reversals. When you transition from one line of action to another, flexibility is created by the reversal. Anticipation, overshoot, and settle. Before you move in one direction, it's common to anticipate that action by moving in the opposite direction. This gives the audience time to read the action. Often, before coming to a stop, characters overshoot beyond the final resting point. In this very simple animation, you can see an anticipation followed by an overshoot and then a settle into the final pose. The wizard has a really nice example of this. If a part of the body moves in one direction, there's often the part of the body that moves in the opposite direction. This is an instinctive way for the body to remain in balance. Counterpose, or torque, is the rotation of the hips and shoulders relative to one another. And this technique was used by Renaissance artists like Michelangelo to create lifelike dynamic poses. Counterpose is essential when animating physical actions like walks or runs, because the body naturally counterposes as we move to stay in balance. And you can also use counterpose to create naturalistic standing positions. An action can be led by a particular part of the body. So you can lead by the shoulder or the elbow or the wrist. Any body part can in theory lead an action. The sections in red in this scene are the leading actions of a zombie walk. Walks and runs, for example, can be radically changed by leading with different body parts, chest, chin, or hips. Breaking joints is a great technique for loosening an action and giving it flexibility. The mummy's elbow leads so much that it seems to break for a moment. So joints can be broken in ways that are impossible anatomically but that look really great in animation. Different parts of the character or their clothing or their hair move at different speeds because they have different weights and different properties. Notice how the bear's belly drags. It moves behind the main character and only settles into the final rest about 8 frames after the main body. Each part of the wizard, the head, the hands, the clothing and the hair, all arrive to a stop on different frames, which you'll see flashing in blue. Accents are the strongest beats or actions in a scene. When you animate a dialogue scene, you have to graph the accents. Here are 2 examples.
I'm mad as hell. I'm mad as hell.
In the first, the stress or the main accent was on the D sound in mad, and in the second it was on the L sound in hell. So find out where the big accents are and align the action accordingly. Exaggeration is used to squeeze a little more life out of your scene by pushing the action, the expression, or the pose a bit further. Some studios like Warner Brothers went to great extremes with the Looney Tunes series back in the 40s and 50s. But of course, push any drawing too far and it will break. Now, animators do have to satisfy basic physical expectations. Characters should follow arcs, they should have a center of mass, they should accelerate and decelerate believably. That said, you shouldn't feel constrained by strict Newtonian ideas. For example, the character who runs off the cliff and doesn't fall until he realizes he's in midair. But notice that even in this case, the character must accelerate in some sort of logical sequence. So the feet fall first, then the waist, then the chest, then the neck and head. But don't be afraid to experiment and, as the bad bosses say, try to have fun with it. I'm going to expand on each of these 21 foundations in future movies, so subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more. You can read the long-form essay about this video on angryanimator.com, and don't forget to follow my courses on Lynda and LinkedIn Learning, specifically the Tips and Tricks series and the course on drawing cartoon characters. Links to all these are included below. Bye.